I'm going to welcome all of you to Book Carnival. I'm so glad you could join us tonight. My name's Anne Saller, and we've got two amazing authors here. One whose book has just come out, Michael Sears, with Tower of Babel, which is amazing, and Owen Laukkanen, who is going to be questioning as to how he got there. And Owen has his own wonderful books, and they're friends, right?
We are.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So they're going to tell tales on each other. I'm not. I'm going to sit here and enjoy this evening. I'm going to ask everybody to mute yourselves, and we're going to get going. That way the sound is much better for our authors. Okay. And Owen, I'm turning it over to you.
Perfect. Well, thanks everyone for being here. I am really honored and delighted to be here in support of my friend Michael. I've been wanting to, get a chance to see him and chat with him for a while. I'm up in Canada, so obviously have not been able to travel much. And so it's wonderful to see Anne. It's wonderful to see Michael. It's wonderful to see just human faces. And Michael and I, in particular, it's neat to do an event together because we kind of got our big break at the same time. And I don't know if you want to kind of tell your story, Michael.
We were freshmen together.
Yeah, very much. I mean, we both of us signed deals with Putnam for our first books with an editor who happened to be kind of one of the big names in the business, Neil Nyren. He was Tom Clancy's editor and Clive Cussler's editor and John Sanford's editor. And so I think for me and probably for you as well, Michael, it was probably a bit of a, being kind of starstruck by that.
Oh yeah.
Jumping
yes.
in.
Yeah.
And so we each kind of wrote a number of books in our series. Michael won the Seamus Award. He was a Wall Street Journal bestseller, I believe. And just accumulated a lot of accolades for a very successful and delightful series, of which I am an avowed fan. And then, kind of out of the blue, Neil retired, and I think both of us kind of had to land on our feet. And Tower of Babel for Michael.
Our lives changed.
Yeah, very much. So
right.
I don't know if you want to talk a bit about how that process was for you.
Well, for me, I was wrestling with a book, and Neil kept telling me what was wrong with it, and then I decided that no, I just couldn't finish that book. I knew what he wanted me to do. I couldn't do it, and so I said, okay, I'm just going to step back and see what else comes to mind. And then the next thing I know, I was an orphan, and and it kind of pitching people I didn't know ideas and whatnot. It was a very strange experience.
It is strange because with Neil, for me and I'm sure for you get this kind of comfort of having this person who, when he says things to the people at Putnam, it's essentially law. And so you're kind of removed from that, the grind, I think, of writing, and you can really just focus on the craft. And then to kind of be orphaned is really almost a slap in the face of reality.
But we've both come through it. I'm really thrilled to be with Soho. It's a really good group, and I have I've known Soho and a lot of the people there for as long as I've been writing, and I've been close with them. I trust my editor. This is good stuff right now. So
sure, yeah. I mean, I was thinking about, for me and wondering about how this was for you, but one of the things, the pressures of writing with Putnam was this idea that you're writing a series, you're expected to kind of keep churning out books, and a lot of maybe the creative side of things turns into now I'm producing a product for this big entity. And I wondered if you found maybe there's something liberating about that orphanage and just going back to,
Yes,
his writing.
actually, when Neil retired, I felt this. Wow, I don't have to do a book a year. I can go back to writing like it was fun, and I've been doing that since, and finally have a product, and hope to have another soon in the same series. But it's it's a lot more fun right now than it was at one point. So
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that book a year with people depending on you. I don't know if you felt as though, for me, I felt, I'm proud of the books that came out of that, but I also felt as though it wasn't necessarily why I got into writing and kind of the best use of my creativity.
I was in a workshop at one point a while back, and there was a woman in it. She worked on a book for 10 years. And it was a very funny book, and I enjoyed it. Hearing her, I wasn't in the workshop for 10 years. When I came in, I'd already been there for a long time. And anyway, she sold her book.
Wow.
She got a 2-book deal. She had to turn in another book 10 months later. That was the deal.
Oh boy.
She did it.
Yeah, did she?
Did it.
Wow. Good,
Yep.
good. I mean, it's like the nightmare of, they say with your first album as a musician, you have your whole life to create that first album and then a year to distill your creativity down to the second. So let's
talk about books. Your recent book, Lone Jack Trail, is the second in a new series.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
Well, yeah. So
but tell me anyway.
So this series kind of came from what we were discussing about feeling orphaned, and I had written 7 books for Putnam, kind of a book a year, and really found myself writing this series about FBI agents in Minnesota, which I loved and I'm proud of, but became kind of a grind and became kind of a, especially as you look at your numbers and your sales, and you're not hitting you're not turning into Tom Clancy every year, and you can sense that the publisher is maybe growing tired of you. And so I kind of hit a rut as far as writing, and what got me out of it was walking my dear companion Lucy every day, who is the star of the Deception Cove books. She's an adopted pit bull, and the books are about a prisoner who is in jail for murder, and while he's in prison, he trains dogs as part of a prison training program, and it was something that I kind of discovered after I'd adopted Lucy, because as a pit bull owner, you automatically become just kind of militant about defending the breed, and I thought, well, here's a story or a possibility of redemption for both, like a pit bull, a dog who's been maligned, and also a human being who's been sent to jail for murder and given up on. And so the idea was that once he gets out of jail, he tries to hunt down this dog and discovers that the dog that he trained is in trouble, and all he wants to do is go and rescue this dog. And he finds that the dog has wound up in a kind of Lee Child Drifter-esque scenario on the West Coast, where there's corrupt sheriff's deputies and someone who he thinks is a damsel in distress, but is actually a combat decorated U.S. Marine who has Lucy as a service dog now. So that was essentially, I just kind of wrote the book as I was walking Lucy, with no expectations, and I wrote it in a, we can talk about process because I'm interested in your process. For me, I write kind of chronologically. But this book, I just found parts that I wanted to write or scenes that I wanted to write as I was walking Lucy, and I'd type them into my phone and then go home and just, scribble them down as quickly as I possibly could, and then try to connect them after. So it was a really, it almost made me fall back in love with writing, or feel that it was a creative output again, as opposed to just, kind of producing a product. So Deception Cove came out a couple of years ago, and then Lone Jack Trail was the sequel, which came out last year. And so it is about our two main characters are Mason the prisoner and Jess the U.S. Marine, and then Lucy. And in this book, a Michael Vick type athlete is found dead, who had engaged in a dogfighting ring, and everyone thinks it was Mason who did it because he's so in love with Lucy. And the tension is between Mason and Jess, trying to figure out how well they know each other, and did this guy who killed once kill again. And so as you can attest, it's always kind of challenging to maintain tension throughout a series when every book has to have a kind of closed arc to it as well. So that's Lone Jack Trail. And I mean, for you, for Tower of Babel, how did that process from what I assume is the fifth and unpublished Stafford book? How did you go from that to building up to Tower of Babel?
It was just opening up, and what's next, and I wanted to do something a little bit noir. I at one point did a lot of research in Queens. Queens was the book takes place in Queens, New York, which is the single most ethnically, culturally diverse county on the planet, by a lot. And I was aware of that, wanted to use that, the economic stratas, the different cultures, all of this. And Queens is also a great place for corrupt politicians, sleazy lawyers, weird real estate deals, money laundering by Russian gangsters, the Italian, the Gotti family. All of this is in inside Queens, and that makes it a really great place to do a noir, but also with a touch of humor to it. And that was my aim. Let me see. My character, my protagonist, is a washed up lawyer who thinks he's okay, and he's not. He needs to be resurrected in some ways, and that's part of his arc in the book. There's like I say, sleazy politicians who take bribes, a friend who's assistant district attorney here in New York. Was telling her about it, and she said, "Okay, well, how much are you bribing them?" I threw out a number, and she said, "Too much." Even by Queens politicians, much cheaper than that. And the gangsters and all of this, and I'm telling another friend about it, and he said, "Oh, you're switching to nonfiction?" Anyway, it's great, and to have this community to work with, it's I can pull in all kinds of people. The first scene takes place in what was an Irish pub, and as the neighborhood changed, it was bought by a Chinese man who tried to run it as an Irish pub, but eventually instituted a dim sum brunch at the Irish pub. and it's still where the nurses from the hospital come after their shift, and the firemen from the station around the block come after their shifts, and yet it is much more diverse than that. So
it's, I mean, it's a just one thing that I've always admired about your writing is just you write with such an eye for detail and create such an atmosphere. I think you make Queens, or you really convey Queens as a living, breathing, just fascinating milieu. And I mean, I'm wondering, how you immersed yourself in, because I know you worked on Wall Street, I know you live in Long Island. I'm wondering how you immersed yourself in this just kind of craziness, and then also how you distill everything that you've just talked about into a coherent and satisfying, noir novel, as opposed to just a, nonfiction portrait of.
I was born in New York City. I grew up out on Long Island. Then we lived in the city for 20 some years, and I now live on Long Island. I've traveled through Queens thousands and thousands of times in my life, and all I knew about it was there were various exits off the Long Island Expressway, or the express train on the Long Island Railroad stopped in Jamaica and then went on to Penn Station. That was as much as I knew about Queens for a very long time. And then 20 years ago or so, I started working with another guy doing various real estate projects. He had somebody who covered Westchester and Manhattan. He had somebody who covered Brooklyn. And so you take Queens. And I did research on various kinds of oddball real estate projects. One thing was going through the tax liens and finding people who were behind on their taxes, and then offering to lend them the money to get current. And I was sitting there at the computer in the county clerk's one day, going through the tax liens, and this tall blonde with big blonde hair came in and sat down next to me, an attractive woman. And she didn't know what she was doing, and she's fumbling through it and trying to figure things out. And she was kind of nicely dressed with gold jewelry and whatnot. And you don't usually run into people like that going through the tax records in the county clerk's office. She was an oddity. And but I'm there to work and do my stuff and get out. And she then started asking me questions. How do I, and when I do this screen comes up and I don't understand. So I was helping her out a little bit while I'm still trying to get my stuff done and get out. And then I started looking at some of the names that she was pulling up. And they were all from the Gotti family. And I realized a few years later, when this woman had her own television show, I was talking to one of the family. And I thought, this is really good. Queens is a really good place to mix different kinds of people together and weirdnesses. So that's really how I got started on this.
Fascinating. I mean, I think another one of your strengths is just, with the Stafford books, taking people into kind of the periphery of Wall Street, or into kind of financial operation. And here, the tax lien stuff, I think if you on paper, that sounds, you're going to get people kind of, rolling their eyes, but it's just as fascinating and seedy in the book as it is as you're telling it.
It's no different than stealing, your great aunt's jewels. It's another economic crime. The important thing is is the way it's valued emotionally by all of your characters, and that's how I make it clear. I don't write how-to books on real estate or on Wall Street. Whenever my sister reads one, she's like, "Yeah, but how does it?" And I said, "No, no, no, no. I really don't need to go that deep. It's okay."
Well, that's one of the balances, I think, of writing thrillers, especially in a kind of with a specialized background, is you want to convey enough of the process or the information that people feel like they have a handle of it, but you also don't want to just bog them down in kind of
Yeah.
procedural just ephemera. And I think you do that really well.
Thank you. It gets easier. It was agony on the first couple of books of how to do that and get away with it, and working in a workshop and people telling me, "I don't get it." I know, I'm trying. But I appreciate that people now get a taste of it and can understand enough that knows that to these characters, there's something here that's really important. And sometimes it's just money. So.
Well, speaking of characters, I wanted to talk about Ted Malloy. I feel like he and Jason Stafford from your first 4 books are both, they're both underdogs. They're both men who've fallen from grace. They're both kind of existing on the periphery, I'd say, of what was once their kind of their life and world. And I think there's a lot of, themes of redemption in both the Stafford books and Tower of Babel. And I wonder if you could talk about the similarities and differences between Stafford and Malloy, and how you created Ted.
Ted, I'll say, start at the end. Ted came to me just sitting there in the booth at Gallagher's Pub, and how he got there and where he was, where he needed to go. Ted is divorced. His wife is remarried, a woman, and he has remained friends with her, even though his divorce and all of that was part of his downfall. And he was a big deal Manhattan attorney, and now he's even given up his license. And yet he hasn't given up his ex or those ties, and he needs to, and he doesn't know it. So,
well, his relationship with his ex-wife was one of my favorite parts of the book. I think is those Mets games and the kind of, they obviously they have a familiarity, they have a chemistry with each other that you can get a sense that they're people who still very fond of each other, but gone in different directions, and that leads to some of the conflict.
And they have middle of the night telephone conversations. They watch old movies together separately from their own homes and chat about them. But it's not a healthy place for Ted, and he discovers that in the course of the book, and that's part of his arc. And there are other characters who challenge him, challenge his sense of morality, his sense of right and wrong, and his and there are also characters that I just adore who are really there for fun. His driver Muhammad, a Yemeni immigrant refugee who is trying like hell to be an American, Sometimes he gets it wrong, but often he gets it right too.
Yeah. And we're having fun watching no matter what.
Yeah.
And his driving skills are amazing.
Yeah.
Were you conscious, is the kind of, did you consciously, were you trying to kind of differentiate Malloy from Jason Stafford at all? Is this a, the redemptive theme? Is this something that you like to work with?
Again, I work with a couple of other authors in a workshop, and they would catch me up. You're sounding a little bit like Jason again. And it did require, and it halfway through the book it stopped happening, but it was difficult to differentiate them. Part of it is though that made it easier to differentiate them is that Jason was a hard, Jason Stafford was a hard guy. He was a tough guy. He was a Wall Street trader. But after prison, he realizes he needs something, and he finds it in almost immediately in rescuing his 5-year-old son who's on the autistic spectrum. And their arc together through the 4 books is it keeps growing, and that brings him out. That makes him Jason, a rounder human being. It teaches him about love. Ted thinks he's fine. Ted fell from whatever, but you know what? He thinks he's okay, and he needs to be pretty much hit on the head to have it demonstrated to him by his ex-wife, by his ex-wife's wife, by the murder of his research assistant, and by other characters as well, that he needs to be shaken out of the rut that he's in. That like I say, he doesn't know it's a rut. He doesn't really see himself that way, and he needs to. So
he does. Yeah, that's
yep.
He's really more of a kind of like you say, the seedier kind of noir, kind of down on his luck, but doesn't quite know it yet. Kind of protagonist. He's a lot of fun to spend a book with, though. I'll say that. I would be very happy to let him give me a tour of Queens. I think, not to just pile you with things that I admire about your writing, but I've always found that you write with a lot of empathy towards the characters, whether they are your main characters, whether it's the kid, whether it's ex-wives or even bad guys. And I'm wondering, how do you what's your process for creating characters? You obviously seem to kind of work to make them 3-dimensional and empathetic and living, breathing characters. And how do you how do you do that?
My very first career was as an actor, and I use that all the time in creating my characters. And one thing you learn early on as an actor is that most characters think they're the good guy. Iago is different, but Tybalt, who kills Mercutio and is then killed by Romeo, and he thinks he's defending the family's honor. He thinks he's being a good guy, and that's that I bring to all of my characters. That the good guys, the bad guys, major parts and minor. I've got character sketches that I've written for all these people, and how did they get where they are, and what are their hopes and dreams, and what do they want to get out of this, so that when it comes time to put them both in a scene together, I can empathize with both sides, and let them find what they need in the scene.
Well, I mean, it pays off. It really works. That's a really interesting point, though. How much kind of background work do you do with character sketches and outlining maybe and stuff that never makes it to the published book? How much of that goes into your process?
Actually, less and less as I go on. I find that I don't need to do things as extensively. My first couple of books, my outtakes and my notes was a bigger file than the book. And that's not an efficient way of working, let me tell you. And when I started working, I worked very much of just write a scene and put these characters in it and see what happens, and now I'm much more chronological in my approach, because it makes it easier on me. I still don't outline unless I've got a half of the book or more done, and then I'll start seeing, oh, this is the way this all fits together.
Right.
And you know what? Maybe he didn't do it, and maybe he did. Those kinds of things, which are wonderful surprises. That I don't know if I could write a whole book just by an outline. I think I'd go mad. So.
It starts to seem a lot like work if you're just kind of transcribing from an outline.
Yeah.
And so, did you know how the book would end when you started Tower of Babel? Did you, you know who the no?
I knew that very, very early on. I knew that the book was a love story. That was the defining thing between everyone, and therefore that led me to the solution to the major crime in the book. But I didn't know. I had no idea when I started. The opening lines of the book were the opening lines that I wrote, and I didn't know who any of these people were at the time.
Nice. And how different is the first draft from the published book?
The rest of the book, after that, it just leaps off. This time I found myself writing fewer dead ends, but I would say 2/3 of the book has been written twice, and 1/3 of it has been written 3 times. And
okay,
yeah.
But you feel like you're honing the process as you move along in your career. Like the earlier the Stafford books were a bit more of a.
Yeah, and the thing also is writing this book without feeling the pressure of I'm writing this for me, and having fun with it, and having fun in my workshop, and learning again how what works for me as a writer, so it's was a really positive experience. So.
Awesome.
I mean, my wife is going to be skeptical about that. She's seen the other side of, oh God, why am I doing this?
I mean, Michael, you've always struck me as someone who, maybe there's a a bit of agony and rending of the garments in the creative process. I don't know how accurate that is, but I get sometimes I've run into you at a convention and you've been kind of mentioned that you've been agonizing over a book for a
Yeah. Well, keeps me
process.
young.
Yeah.
One of the things that I like so much in your books, Michael, and it was true in the first series and is now, even the smallest character is well-rounded and you learn something about her or he. No one is pushed in the background, or you're not left with some impression of what that person is like. An example is Honora from The Home.
Oh my goodness, yes. Yeah.
I mean, we learned so much in that brief scene about her, and yet she wasn't a central character at the point that happened. And Barbara Miller, I could so relate to what she was going through, unknowingly sometimes.
There were a couple of years from 2016 to 19 where both my mother and her sister were coming to the end of their lives. My aunt was in a home. Dementia was part of it for both of them, and all of that. Barbara Miller is not either of those people, but that experience certainly helped. And Honora was also part of that experience too. Again, she's nothing like the person who was my aunt's caregiver, but there's something there. There's something that I learned about people from that experience that comes out in Honora. So.
Yeah, it's so it's touching, and it's so nice to have someone just be a name that passes through the page and doesn't leave you with anything. You always leave your reader with something that deals with those characters. They're very well rounded. It's a great way to go.
I think it's really one of your strengths, one of the strengths of all of the books. Kind of a related question. Queens, as you mentioned, is such a diverse area and just full of, and the book itself is just full of kind of, you have Muhammad, you have people from all over, all walks of life, all, races, creeds. So how do you write those characters who share very little with you? How do you do that without verging into caricature, without kind of walking the line of representation?
It's not easy, and I am and part of it is I have this governor working in the back of my head the whole time saying, don't do that. And that helps keep a lid on it of that I don't let it go into caricature. There's a prominent character who comes in, Lester, and he's black. I don't think there's anything in what Lester does or says that couldn't have been done by a white character. But I do hope that I've given you a flavor of Lester's life is a little bit different than it, and that little bit different is important to Lester and to the people that relate to him. And but that is a constant, not a struggle, but it's a constant challenge in writing these books. So,
I mean, I think it's, as writers, as kind of people who are creating it, it's worth having that governor. And that governor is probably a pretty valuable thing to have in the back of your head, as far as not becoming offensive or becoming caricatures, but also kind of being true to the diversity of the environment.
Yes. Yep.
For me, one of the joys of crime fiction is that you can use it as a way to advance your kind of social commentary, or at least kind of bring to light themes that you think are important. One of my books deals with missing and murdered Indigenous women, which is a big deal up here in Canada. And I'm wondering if how much of that goes into your thought process when writing these books, and if any, and how you kind of navigate themes or build themes out from a story as a whole.
That is something that I have dealt with in the Jason Stafford books, very specifically to the whole issue of autism and how an autistic person survives. I hope to return to that issue. It's something that that's very close to my heart. I don't know that the world is waiting for my opinion on. I would not or could not write a book as you have that touches on the evils and awfulness of dogfighting. I wouldn't know what to do with it. I wouldn't, and who cares what I think? But I do think that there are issues that I can have something to say on it, and one of them is on people on the spectrum, and how the dignity that they need and deserve as human beings. Other issues, and definitely the issue of migrants in New York, I have touched on in this book, and I really, in the sequel, I hope to expand on that. I don't need to go into politics here, but everybody on this page came from immigrants, for God's sakes, and no matter where you eat, or who cleans your room in the hotel, or who carried up the ice for the bartender, these are all immigrants in New York. That's who's doing those jobs. And I think we need to take a hard look at this and finally answer some of those questions. But in the meantime, it is a good grounds for something to write about here. And
sure. And I mean, I think
about
with the kid in the Stafford books, and with with Tower of Babel, there's kind of background themes of gentrification, of kind of political corruption and stuff.
Yes.
And those are all things that as writers, even if we want to kind of talk about, none of the Stafford books are just a didactic treatise on what it's like to raise an autistic child. It's depth. It's and so I think that you really walk the balance well of advancing those things, but and mentioning those things, but not letting them take over.
For those who haven't read it yet, the MacGuffin central issue of the book is that a developer is building a huge high-rise in a solid community that's going to wipe out that community, and it's a monstrous building, like the tower, and in fact that's what people refer to it as, and the fact that it is going to destroy this community. At any rate, when I started this, some people said, "Wait, this in Corona? Come on, that's never going to happen." Well, then Amazon said they were coming to Queens, and Long Island City is chock full of buildings just like this, reaching up to the sky. And then they started actually getting permissions in Astoria, about 2 miles away from where I had my tower. So yeah, it's not very likely in Corona, but it's likely in Queens. That's.
I wonder if we should open it up to other questions at this point.
Right.
If everybody would unmute, see what kind of questions we have from our viewers here. And while they're getting themselves unmuted, I will just have to tell you that first taxi ride that he takes with, and I've forgotten the driver's name. Muhammad was very much reminiscent of one I took in one of my trips to New York. I just held on tightly and hoped that we would get someplace in one piece. That seems to be a known thing for taxi drivers in New York. They find the smallest spot and they get through it. I've never known how they manage it.
The world's best drivers.
So who has questions for, go for it, Barbara.
Well, I don't have a question so much as a comment, because I'm often asked by people to recommend books that deal with children on the autism spectrum in a realistic and fair manner. And I always recommend your Jason books because that's exactly what they do. And I also liked in this one that even though it was kind of an undercurrent of the whole plot, the real cost of redevelopment and what people don't think of when they think of, oh, there's going to be a great new building and it's going to have a lot of nice stuff, but yet there is a cost to having that great new building.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's North Corona. Queens changes a lot. Not only every generation, every few years. There's one point in the book, I had something going on in a little store. One of my lawyer buddies who helps me out and had read that section said, I was just down there. You need to change that. There's already an office building going on in on that corner. And but there's also long histories of there's an Italian deli in North Corona that's been there 5 generations. It's where all the firemen tell you to get the best deli in Queens. It's terrific, but 5 generations, the same family running this. When I was doing the real estate research, I'd come upon these buildings in College Point, which is a kind of enclosed community. It's hidden behind a highway on one side and the New York Times printing plants on another, and you have to go to College Point because you want to be there. There's no other reason to go to College Point. And I'd find these buildings there that had changed hands like 3 times in 150 years.
Oh.
They were just passed on to another family member, and those are the kinds of things that get lost. And Queens is a place for immigrants because real estate is accessible. People can live there and work at entry-level positions and make it. Once you could do that in Brooklyn, you can't do that in Brooklyn anymore. Manhattan is priced out from one end to the other, but you can still do that in Queens. And if they're going to start carving up all of those communities and creating more big high rises for wealthy people to live in, it's going to dramatically change the whole nature of Queens. Anybody else?
Yeah, really. Nothing?
Well, I have a little notebook where I write down things that people say.
Yes.
And when you were here before, I wrote down that you also like to read a lot. So what are you reading now? And what other than, well, and for both of you, what are you reading now? And other than each other's books, what books would you recommend to all of us who are readers? And I'll write them down in my little book.
Take it first, Michael. Give me time to think.
All right. This guy's book is now, it just got nominated for, I think, the Thriller Award. It's nominated for the LA Times Book Award for Mysteries. But I've been talking about this book for a year now. Blacktop Wasteland by S.A. Cosby.
Oh.
It's surprising in so many ways. It's Southern noir, but from a really new and particularly interesting point of view through it, and really good book.
He won the LA Times
He
award
did.
this week. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
But they just announced the Thriller Awards, and he's up for that too. Yeah.
And he's a nice guy.
Good
Yeah.
to know. What about you, Owen?
And it's a fantastic book.
It's on my to read pile. It's my to read bookshelf, but obviously
You need
bumped
to move it up to the
now.
top.
Yeah, no, it's I do. It's a whole bookshelf, but I'm currently reading this memoir called In the Land of Men, which is by a lady who became the fiction editor at Esquire magazine as a 25-year-old in the 90s, and she dated David Foster Wallace right after Infinite Jest came out. And so it's kind of about the life of a 25-year-old woman in publishing, which is was then and particularly in kind of the prestigious, it's about her kind of navigating like Norman Mailer, John Updike, Philip Roth, these kind of grand old white men and even David Foster Wallace as a 25-year-old woman who is, kind of judged to, she's the literary editor at Esquire, but if you're that young and female in a position of power, people are always going to wonder why and how you got there. And so it's it's very much inside baseball. It's very much like as a writer, I'm kind of just curious about life in publishing, but it's also, as a white male writer, it's kind of worth reading as a, here's how not to behave, because here's how you'll come across, you never want to wind up in someone's memoir as a cautionary tale. So I'm reading that as like a, kind of break from, before that I was reading nonfiction about these two books about murdered Indigenous people in Canada, which is, kind of a pet passion of mine, and really kind of grim but worthwhile stuff. So this is my almost my palate cleanser.
Oh, and you can't say murdered Indigenous women are your passion. You have to work on how you say it.
it's right. Yeah, no, that's phrasing is not right.
Michael, what are you working on next?
Yeah, I want to hear about the sequel.
Working on a sequel to this, and spinning my wheels a little bit, but it will be much more about the immigrant experience specifically.
Great. And about a year from now, do you think, or are you going to take a little longer? Because you were talking about not wanting to do this 1 year after another type of thing.
Yeah, but I know these people pretty well, and I know the points I want to make. I feel like a year would be a long time out, but we'll see. Is Juliet still there?
Yes, Juliet is still
My
there.
editor. I'm not making any promises.
And
I had a
Owen,
question about your future plans, Michael. Kind of inspired by another one of our Neil Nyren alums, Tom Young, just published. He was writing
Yeah.
modern military stuff, and he just wrote a military historical thriller. I'm wondering if there's a genre or a book outside of kind of the crime genre that you've been toying with, and specifically. I know you're an avid sailor, and as somebody who's written a nautical adventure, I am really hoping that you will, write something on the water.
The very first book I wrote that is one of those drawer books, in that it's in a drawer and will stay there. But it's a book about a man who falls in love with an old wooden Chris Craft motorboat, and how it destroys his life, bankrupts him, almost gets him divorced, and it's a true story, or based on a true story, and maybe someday I'll resurrect that. It needs a little work. Or maybe I'll just leave it for my son, and they can.
I mean, they say a boat is a hole in the ocean to pour your money into. So it sounds like that's the moral of that story.
And Owen, what's next for you?
Well, so I published a young adult novel in January called The Wild, which is based on kind of someone who I used to know who, as a teenager, had a drug problem and a dropped out of school problem, and her parents paid to have her kidnapped and flown to Utah and marched around in the desert for 3 months until she was judged to be kind of better, which didn't work, but is the thing that happens to people. And so, when she told me about this, I thought, well, this is A, a horrible thing to go through as a teenager, and B, like pretty good fodder for a story, especially, if you're just amassing 9 kind of bad apple kids in the wilderness and having things go wrong. So that came out in January and has been optioned by HBO Max. And so kind of just pitching a second young adult book to my editor based on kind of a dog rescue thing, which has been my actual passion during this this pandemic, has been rescuing dogs. And so I'm working on a young adult about that, and I'm actually I've been fiddling with a historical novel and with a kind of 50 Shades of Grey-esque domestic suspense novel, but I have nothing under contract right now, but plenty of things, kind of irons in the fire. So we'll see.
Sounds
Will you
good.
go back to the Bay at all?
Pardon?
Will you go back to the Bay?
I would like to. I have a book planned for the Lone Jack Trail series that I would like to write. I think, with the kind of getting a book out in the pandemic, like the Lone Jack Trail, which is the second book, it's the road to publication was just fraught. As we were kind of talking about, my editor left the business midway through editing the book, and so the release dates were pushed back, and so consequently we're kind of in limbo on that front. But I definitely have a book planned, and would like to go back to those characters, and would like to go back to, obviously, writing about Lucy, because writing about one's dogs or sailboats is a good way to make all those things tax deductible, I hear. So, and that's the trick of being a writer.
Sorry.
Whatever works, I think is great, because we enjoy everything both of you gentlemen write. It's been a great thing. Anything else you would like to tell your fans while you have the chance?
Thank you all for coming out. This is a really big day. There's a whole lot happening on the news. There's plenty we could all be watching, and I really appreciate spending this time with us. So,
And we in turn appreciate your time and yours as well, Owen. And let's plan that the next book, whether it be a year from now or whenever, is going to be in the store and you guys will be there in person.
All
I
right.
look forward to it.
That's
I
my game.
always love coming back to Book Carnival and seeing you, Anne. So I really,
Thank you.
really hope so.
Yeah, we need to make it happen. Everybody's working on it. Barbara's saying, good luck, Owen, with your YA. Sounds interesting. They do. And glad to
Thanks,
meet
Barbara.
you. Have heard so much about you
Yeah.
from Michael. Thanks, everybody, so much for joining us tonight. This has been recorded, will eventually be posted. And you can, if you've missed any of it, or if you know someone else that'll enjoy it, please let them know. Books are at Book Carnival, and we'll have them available for you. Again, thank you so much, Michael, and you, Owen,
Thank you,
for this
Anne.
evening.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Anne. And
Thank
everyone,
you.
pick up Tower of Babel if you haven't already. It's really worth the read. It's a wonderful, wonderful book.
It is, definitely. Bye now. Thank you.
Thank you, Owen.